Hey everyone, I'm ElfEls, and welcome to another draft analysis. We're back in the Whooper Club League, which is actually where I got my start playing Draft League back in Gen 8. My first season with them was in their Season 7. I've been with them every season since, and I did win Seasons 8 and 12, along with a joint win in the multi-battle Season 9 with Illogic. But we're in Season 15 now, which sees the WCL's return to a more standard point-buy system. As far as the draft itself goes, we have 90 points to spend on 11 Pokemon, with tiers ranging from 0 to 15 points. So the budget actually ended up feeling pretty tight. We saw that with a lot of drafts starting to dip into the 0-pointers quite a bit. There were a decent number of bans as well. You have the usual bans like Shedtail and Last Respects, so on and so forth. But there's also some more unique stuff that I don't see too often. No Palafin is allowed, no Urshifus, no Sheerforce Landorus, no Take Heart Manaphy, so a couple of complex bans in there. And I'll note that anytime we come into a matchup like that where we have a ban. Counter to that though, Terra bans are extremely light this season. The way Terra works is that we get up to 3 Terra captains with free type Terra Preview, and their values have to add up to 20 points or less on the Terra tier list sheet, which is slightly different from the regular tier list. And notably, the only Terra ban is Terapagos, which, obviously. So free Terra is allowed to happen on Dragonite, Volcarona, Iron Valiant, Shenpao, and all the other stuff that gets really broken with it. So yeah, I feel like this might be a season for top-heavy drafts. Getting into my draft though, we had a whopping 18 coaches this season, and I'm in position number 18, which means that I do at least get the wheel pick. It also means that there are 17 picks in round 1 before me, so I could miss out on some of those broken Terra captains. But the round 1 pick I had in mind was something I felt was relatively safe at a slightly lower point value, and it did make it back to me. My round 1 pick is Regieleki for 10 points. So, a couple things about Regieleki. I have technically had it on a draft team before, for like 2 weeks in the WCL's auction season, and I went on record saying that I didn't like it for its very linear game plan and easy counterplay. But it also happens to be one of my favorite Pokemon from a creature design standpoint. So with free Terra available to use on it, I figured this was my best chance to use Regieleki to its fullest potential. Before the draft started, I actually thought this should be banned as a Terra captain, and that's mostly because I thought it would just be a huge pain to deal with. So if I don't want to deal with it, why not just pick it up? Terra Regieleki probably isn't as broken as draft as it was in OU, but it still sounds so good. For 10 points on the draft board and 14 points for a Terra captain, I have the fastest Pokemon in the game, an extremely powerful electric type and Volt Switch pivot thanks to Transistor, and a Rapid Spinner. And the whole coverage issue is essentially gone since I can Terra into any type I want to get around whichever electric immunities there are in the matchup. Terra Ice is probably the first type that comes to mind to get that Bolt Beam coverage, but Grass and Water also look pretty good to deal with other ground types. Honestly, I'm going to love having any type available on this amazing offensive pivot. This should be a great start to build the team around. So with Regieleki first, I am going to want some bulky pieces to pivot into his Volt Switch, but in the meantime, I'm just looking for the best offensive Pokemon left on the board. And the best one I thought there was Greninja for 15 points. And I really like Greninja here because it fills a couple of different roles pretty well. This can be my early game pivot with U-turn and spikes, a breaker with choice specs and protein, or a late game cleaner with battle bond. And that kind of gets to the core of these first 2 picks together. Regieleki and Greninja can both fill the role of early game pivoting and utility, but they both love being endgame win conditions with their power and speed. So with that in mind, I'm starting on my draft with really just 2 extremely fast, unpredictable Pokemon that can and will take over the endgame if given the opportunity. And because I grabbed both of them, I don't feel too much pressure on either one to make that endgame plan happen. If I want to use Regieleki as an early game pivot and hazard remover, Greninja can always be that win con. And if Greninja looks good as a spikes lead, Regieleki can always clean up. Point is, I can build in a lot of different ways with these 2. Now the core does need its support though, and if they're both really good endgame pieces, I'm going to need to draft some power and bulk to break things down in the early game. Regieleki and Greninja are going to struggle against bulkier teams, so I'll try looking for a breaker first. With that in mind, Salamence might sound a little weird as a 3rd pick since you might think of it as another late game sweeper with Dragon Dance, but for this team I really like it as either a physical or special breaker that also doubles as a bulky flying type with Intimidate. This is a decent switch into certain fighting and ground types, and it's also got that 135 base attack. Both of those things my first two picks really appreciate as frail special attackers. Of course, this can always be a mid to late game sweeper with Dragon Dance 2. Looking forward to using Salamence. So with that, I did just pick up a second fairy weakness, so I should probably draft my steel type next. Of the remaining options, I liked Tinkaton the best. I've drafted this before, and as both a steel and a fairy, it is an amazing glue piece. Tinkaton has the bulk and typing to switch into a bunch of different threats, and a pretty good utility move pool, including Stealth Rock, Knockoff, Encore, and Thunderwave. Its offenses aren't even bad either, considering it has Sword Dance as well as great dual stabs between Play Rough and Gigaton Hammer. So this should be a great bulky pivot to support the rest of the team. And then with the four first picks in, I decided that I need some more breaking power, so I decided in the end to go with Ogerpon. The biggest reason I actually went with this pick is that it slots perfectly into my speed tiers at 110 base speed, right between Salamence and Greninja. It's also another way to punish ground types, so I have some extra Regieleki support. But yeah, this should be another good early game breaker / pivot. Ogerpon has a very strong Ivy Cudgel off of base 120 attack, Knockoff, U-Turn, Spikes, and Encore, among plenty of other coverage options. This is one pick where I'm not too sure what kind of sets I'm going to bring with it, but the stats and move pool look pretty good regardless. It's just going to be a solid physical attacker. And to pair up with that for this wheel pick, I am looking for my ground type, and I'm still in the market for early game bulky pieces. So I was shocked that it made it back to me, but I was able to grab Donphan in round 6. I'm so used to seeing this go in the earlier rounds because Donphan checks off so many boxes. It's a physically bulky ground type, a hazard remover, and a rock setter, so there is just so much utility here. Its move pool is also pretty darn good with Knockoff and plenty of coverage options, as well as Ice Shard as some decent priority. Donphan can definitely afford to go more offensive with the moves it has access to. I see this as a pretty good lead in a lot of matchups thanks to Sturdy, or a nice switch into certain physical threats that can allow me to follow up with hazard support, Knockoff, or just a strong Earthquake. Now to me this feels like a huge steal so late in the draft. So with the first 6 picks out of the way, I feel like I've budgeted pretty well so far with a decently balanced first half of the draft. No outlying huge point totals outside of Greninja from the top tier. But around now is when I have to start dipping down into low tiers. I do like my finds though. First, I have to find something for 6 points or lower for my other Terra Captains. So I looked through the 6-pointers and found Farigiraf, which I really like in this slot. I used this a couple seasons ago, mostly as a special defense wish pivot, and I think it still does great in that role, but as a Terra Captain, Farigiraf actually has some pretty good sweeping potential. With a free turn or two from a type mix-up, it can stack up multiple boosts with Agility, Calm Mind, or Nasty Plot, and potentially get a sweep going from there with stored power and plenty of coverage. That's really what I wanted out of a lower tier Terra Captain. Regieleki is probably going to be my Terra option in most games, so I wanted something that can benefit a lot from Terra, but doesn't need it to do well. Because Farigiraf can be a really nice bulky piece with or without Terra. And between Regieleki and Farigiraf, that is 20 Terra points, so these are going to be my only 2 Terra Captains unless I were to pick up a 0-pointer later. One other interesting thing about Farigiraf is its Psychic normal typing, which has 2 major implications. My Psychic type is not a fighting resist, but it's also a Ghost immunity. So that means I'm a lot more comfortable picking up a Ghost type alongside it for those reasons. With that said, my round 8 pick is Chandelure. I wanted to flesh out my Fire Water Grass core, and another Wall Breaker never hurts, so this looked like a pretty good pickup. It also helps that Chandelure is my all-time favorite Pokemon, so it's got that going for it. This isn't providing the most defensive utility out there, but it has multiple immunities and a couple of decent resistances that can allow it to enter the field, and then just output ridiculous damage from there. Some matchups I've seen for this season, Chandelure could really go off with just its dual stabs. For a lower tier, later round pickup, I think this provides my team with some much needed firepower. So with that, I only have 8 points left to pick up 3 Pokemon, and honestly, I'm feeling just fine about the team I already have. So these last 3 picks are mostly just filling niche roles that I may need once or twice. So first up, for 5 points, I grabbed Qwilfish. I mostly just wanted to find a grounded poison type to absorb T-Spikes, and Qwilfish does check that box. It's also a decent physical sponge with Intimidate, and it's got spikes and toxic spikes of its own, plus some passable offensive utility. Base 95 attack isn't bad, and Aqua Jet is always some potential tech. But I am mostly just getting Qwilfish for the utility and defensive profile. Next up, for 1 point, I picked up Furret. And the niche this is filling is that my wife really likes it. Guys, marriage is about give and take, and in my case, you know, she supports my Pokemon addiction, but she's got to see her favorite Pokemon on my draft. That's how it works, I don't make the rules. But yeah, for a 1-pointer, I could do a lot worse than Furret. We fill out a decent speed tier at base 90, Tidy Up means this is a hazard remover, and Frisk is a great ability in drafts, so Furret could see some use as an early game scout with either Sash or a choice item to keep hazards away and get information. Okay, with that, it's my last pick. I have 2 points left, and I never picked up a fighting type. So, might as well grab the best stab close combat I can find, and this low on the tier list, that is gonna be Phalanx. And there's a lot that Phalanx can theoretically do. No Retreat is pretty cool setup, Defiant is a good ability, and a move pull with knockoff and first impression is actually pretty nice for a fighting type. But with these base stats, all I really care about is getting a decently strong close combat option to use on immediate offense sets. And the speed tier. At base 75, it does actually help build out my team's speed in the middle a little more. Nothing too special, but it could come in handy for a matchup or two. So yeah, that is going to do it for the draft. I'm pretty happy with the team. I don't know about the overall viability, but I do really like all the Pokemon on here. It's honestly a team where, except for maybe Qwilfish, I guess, every draft pick was made at least partially because I personally really like the Pokemon. So, you know, we're having some fun with this season. But I do love how the team came together. Really excited about the speed stats on this draft. Obviously, with Regieleki, that was going to be a strength, but I just love how the speed tiers are working for me. The type synergy isn't too bad either. The only thing that really stands out is an overall ground weakness, but I think my 2 ground resists are pretty solid, so honestly not too worried about it. So with all that being said, the season is starting pretty soon, so I hope you guys tune in for that. Full disclosure, this league is not upload required, and I have another draft starting in a few weeks that is, so I might not getting around to uploading every week for the WCL, just if I get too busy. But I'll do what I can. Week 1 is coming soon, so I'll see you all then.